"You'll get nothing from the will, Mia. Not a dime." My father's voice thundered across the Thanksgiving table. My brothers smirked, proud heirs to his empire, while I sat there, silent, forcing myself to swallow the sting of his words. Then, out of nowhere, my nephew shot up from his chair, phone in hand. "Aunt Mia is on CNBC's Billionaire list," he shouted. The room froze. Forks dropped. No one breathed. On the glowing screen, the headline burned into their eyes. $2.8 billion deal. But before that night, before the shock, before the silence, I was just a 24-year-old girl driving down a cracked Texas highway, back toward the ranch I swore I'd never return to. The tires of the rented car hummed softly on the cracked Texas highway. It was a familiar sound, one that had always made my heart pound in a way I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the miles between me and the family I'd left behind, or maybe it was the dread that hung heavy in the air as I neared the ranch. 6 years had passed since I last saw them, but it felt like I'd never left. The same yellowing fields, the same winding road, the same clucking of chickens in the distance. It was all so suffocating. I could smell the hay now, just faintly drifting through the cracked window. A memory flickered. I was 10, maybe 11, running through this very stretch of road on my way to the barn, my hands raw from chores. Too many chores. My father's stern voice echoed in my head as if he were sitting next to me in the car. Girls belong in the kitchen, not dreaming of business. I swallowed hard. That voice, his words, the sting of those memories, now so old, felt fresh as ever. I didn't want to come back here, not like this. But I had to. For the past 6 years, I built a life for myself, a successful one. I wasn't the useless daughter anymore, but would they see me differently? Or would I always be the girl who couldn't live up to their expectations? As I turned the wheel, the landscape outside the car shifted. It was the same place where I'd grown up, the same place where I spent my childhood being told I'd never be good enough. The ranch where Dad, Robert, as he liked to be called, pushed me aside while he poured all his hopes into my brothers, Ethan and Dylan. They were the heirs, the ones who would inherit the family business, the ones who could do no wrong in his eyes. I was just there, a burden, a reminder that I was never what he wanted. The ranch was everything to him. I could still see it clearly in my mind, the sprawling white fences, the old barn, and the endless fields stretching as far as the eye could see. It was all so familiar, and yet so foreign, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I hadn't set foot on this land in years, but here I was coming back for Thanksgiving. Why? Maybe because a part of me thought they would see who I'd become. Maybe because I thought there was a chance that, just maybe, they'd finally acknowledge my success. The air was thick with memories as I passed the old chicken coops. I could almost hear the clucks in the distance, but all I could focus on was the faint bitterness rising in my chest. Dad had always made sure I knew where I stood, in the shadows. He never wanted me to be anything but a bystander. He praised my brothers endlessly while I was shoved into a corner to do the chores no one else wanted. I could hear his voice again, the words that would never leave me. "You're not cut out for this. Leave the business to the men." He said it so often that I believed it for a long time. I believed that my worth, my value, was nothing more than what I could do for others. That I was nothing more than a helper, a servant, a disappointment. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter. I'd left all of that behind when I moved to New York. I built a $1 billion startup. I made something of myself without them, without his approval. But they didn't know that. No one knew. I never told them. I never let them in. Would they see me as the woman I'd become? Or would they still see the girl they always tried to put down? I glanced at the road ahead, the faint glow of the ranch lights just visible in the distance. The thought hit me again. How much had I really changed? I was scared of going back, scared of facing them, scared of being reminded of what I once was. And then there was the secret, the one I kept from everyone, the one that kept me up at night, the one that sat heavy in my chest as I drove toward them. What if they found out? What if they knew I wasn't just Mia, the daughter who never quite fit in? What if they knew the truth? Would they respect me then? Or would they despise me for not sharing my success with them? The wind picked up swirling dust along the side of the road. I felt a sense of nostalgia tug at me. It was both comforting and suffocating at the same time. This was home, wasn't it? But I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. Not after everything. I slowed the car as I neared the gates of the ranch. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, my stomach twisted in knots. I didn't know if I was ready for this. I didn't know if I was ready to face the ghosts of my past. Would they see me? Or would I always be the little girl who never measured up? 6 years apart. Would they see me differently now? Or am I still the useless daughter? The car coasted slowly up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, lit warmly against the dark Texas sky, but all I could focus on was the cold, distant memory of my father's face as he told me I would never amount to anything. I pulled up to the house and turned off the engine. The silence in the car was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the weight of everything I hadn't said, everything I hadn't faced. I stepped out, and the chill of the night air hit my skin. The ranch felt different now. Or maybe I was just different. It didn't matter. I was here. It was time. I don't remember much about the details of the argument. It's the feeling that stuck with me, the burn of betrayal that I can still taste, even after all these years. It was in Dad's office, the one with the thick wood desk that always looked too big for the room, the heavy scent of stale tobacco clinging to the air like a bad memory. I can still see it. The dim light streaming through the window, casting long shadows on the walls, lined with old books. I remember standing there, fists clenched, trying to keep my voice steady as I told him I'd been accepted to NYU. I told him about the scholarships, the professors who had taken an interest in my work, my future. I thought he'd be proud. I thought he'd see it, see me. But then he looked at me, like I'd just spoken a foreign language, and in his voice came the words that I'll never forget. Girls should marry rich, not chase business dreams. The words felt like a slap. I wanted to scream, to shout that I was more than just a girl who should dream about getting married, but instead I froze. I stood there feeling small, feeling stupid for thinking for even a moment that he might actually be proud of me. And Mom, she stood there too, her hands trembling as she folded the paper in her lap, eyes welling up with tears but not saying a word. I remember watching her, watching the tears run down her face as she looked at me. She didn't speak up. She didn't say, "No, that's not right." She didn't tell him how hard I'd worked, how many nights I stayed up late just to prove that I was capable of more than just being the daughter who did chores. Mom didn't defend me, she never did, and that silence was its own kind of betrayal. I left that office that day with a knot in my stomach, but something inside me had changed. Dad had made it clear what he thought of me, but he had no idea who I was becoming. He thought he could crush me with a few words, but he only pushed me to dig deeper, to fight harder. I wasn't going to let him keep me in that box. I didn't need his approval or Mom's or anyone's. I would prove them all wrong. I found a job at the local diner, working late nights, pulling shifts between school, doing whatever I could to make sure I could pay my own way to New York. I didn't care how much I had to work. I didn't care how exhausted I was. I wasn't going to be that girl anymore, the one who stayed behind. I wasn't going to let them define me. But the rejection still stung. Every time I pulled on that greasy waitress uniform or scrubbed the floors of some office building at 2 a.m., the weight of my father's words echoed in the back of my mind. Girls should marry rich. It was hard to shake. It felt like every step I took toward independence was another reminder of the world that had rejected me, the world that thought I wasn't good enough because of my gender. But that rejection also gave me fire. Every paycheck I earned, every late-night study session, every moment when I thought I couldn't go on, those were the things that made me stronger. I didn't just have a dream anymore. I had a purpose. I was going to show them that I could succeed without their help, without their approval. I remember one night after a long shift at the diner, sitting in my tiny apartment in the city with the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. The city lights flickered through the window, a dull glow that barely cut through the darkness. I looked at the scholarship letters that I had framed on the wall and felt a mixture of pride and anger. I had worked for this. I had earned it. But still, there was that little voice in the back of my mind whispering that I wasn't good enough. That voice, that rejection, was a hard thing to shake off. It clung to me, lingering in my chest like a knot I couldn't untangle. But I was going to prove them wrong. If Dad thought I wasn't good enough, I would show him just how wrong he was. I would build something that was mine. No handouts, no favors, just me. And when I made it, when I was finally standing on my own, I wasn't going to look back. I wasn't going to need them anymore. I kept my eyes focused on the goal. I stayed up late every night, learning everything I could about the world of business, the world that my father had told me I didn't belong in. I knew I could do it, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all him, make me think otherwise. But still, I wondered, would they ever see me for who I truly was? Would they ever stop seeing me as the girl who couldn't measure up, who wasn't worth the time or the effort? The world they wanted me to be a part of, the one where women were meant to be kept in the background, where only the men got the glory, wasn't the world I was going to settle for. I wasn't going to play by their rules, not anymore. I was going to rewrite my own story. And if they couldn't see that, well, I didn't need their approval to keep going. The small apartment smelled of coffee and stale takeout. The dim glow of the desk lamp was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across piles of papers, textbooks, and empty coffee cups. The hum of the city outside was a constant reminder that I was living in a world that never stopped moving. But inside this cramped space, the only thing that mattered was getting through the next day. I wasn't sure how I did it. 3 jobs, a full-time class schedule, and a growing list of responsibilities that seemed to double every week. Waitressing, retail, late-night data entry. I'd been doing it for months, maybe even years, just to make ends meet, all while holding on to my dream of a future beyond this tiny apartment. I had my eyes set on NYU, and no amount of exhaustion or frustration was going to stand in my way. Every morning felt like I was running a race I wasn't sure I could finish. The paychecks from the diner never stretched far enough. The hours spent in retail felt endless. And yet, despite the weariness pulling at my bones, I managed to get through each day, one task at a time. I remember one particular night. 2 a.m., I was sitting at my tiny desk, typing away at a data entry job I'd found online. The low hum of the computer, the quiet clacking of the keyboard, and the faint sound of the city below felt like they were all blending into one long, never-ending cycle. My eyes were tired, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything I'd fought for. Then came the moment that felt like a turning point. I got the email. It was from Professor Harris, one of my mentors from NYU. The subject line was innocuous enough, quick update or something like that, but the contents were anything but ordinary. The email was short, cryptic, and yet it stirred something in me that I couldn't quite shake. There's something about your family's finances you should know. I stared at the screen for a moment, the words echoing in my head. What could this possibly be about? My mind raced back to the ranch, to Dad, to all the years I spent wondering why he never shared anything with me, why he kept me in the dark, but I couldn't let myself get distracted. Not now. I brushed it off. I didn't have time for family drama. Not now. Not when I was just starting to build something real. I had a startup to run. I had investors to impress. I had to prove to myself and to everyone else that I wasn't just the girl who had been told she couldn't succeed. I could hear Dad's voice in my head, echoing through the years. Girls should marry rich. And the sting of those words was still there, buried deep, but I didn't have time to think about that. Not now. I opened my laptop and went back to work. But that email, that mysterious line about my family's finances, lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. Somewhere in the middle of that exhaustion, in the midst of the relentless push to succeed, I started to see the first glimmers of the future I'd always dreamed of. My startup, my real business, was slowly taking off. I was connected with investors who believed in me, who saw potential in what I was building, even when no one else did. I was climbing out of the hole I'd been buried in for so long, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. But that didn't mean I was free. Not yet. There were still nights when I wondered if it would all fall apart. The stress of making payroll, the pressure of being the only one who believed in my vision, the fear that one bad decision could unravel everything I'd worked for. I'd been on the brink of bankruptcy twice, but somehow I kept going. Somehow I kept making it through. I was a woman in a man's world, trying to carve out a space for myself where I didn't have to beg for approval, where I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself. But what about my family? What about Dad? The truth was, I hadn't told them anything about my success. Not really. Mom knew I was doing well. She'd send me a card every year for my birthday telling me she was proud of me. But she never truly knew. She didn't know about the late nights, the sacrifices, the way I felt like I was constantly on the edge of falling apart. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. Because if they knew, it would just prove everything Dad had said about me wrong. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. To face him. To face the years of resentment that had built up inside me like a volcano, waiting to erupt. So I kept it all a secret. But then that email, the one about my family's finances, I couldn't help but wonder, was there something I needed to know? Something that might explain why Dad had always treated me like an outsider, why he'd always kept me at arm's length. I tried to push the thought out of my mind. I couldn't let myself get caught up in it. Not when I was finally starting to build something. But the curiosity gnawed at me. What was he hiding? I clicked open my email again, rereading the message. Your family's finances. Something wasn't right, but was I willing to dig into it? Or would it pull me back into a past I wasn't ready to face? I shook my head, trying to push the thought aside. I didn't have time for this. But still, the question lingered, unanswered. And as I went back to work, my mind couldn't help but ask, what if that family secret was more than just a mystery? What if it was the key to everything? I still remember the clinking of silverware against porcelain, the low hum of voices in the background, and that thick silence hanging in the air, like something was wrong, but nobody was willing to say it. Thanksgiving dinner, 6 years ago. But to me, it feels like it happened just yesterday. The yellow light from the chandelier cast long, dim shadows across the wooden dining table. The smell of turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing filled the air. Familiar, comforting. But nothing about that night felt comforting. Not with them. Not with the coldness that had settled between us. I had worked so hard to get to that point, building my fintech startup, putting my heart and soul into it. I was ready to share it with them. To show them I wasn't just the girl who did the dishes, the girl who was dismissed for being too emotional or too weak. I was ready to show them I could succeed, that I could build something, that I could be more than they ever saw me as. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they would see me for who I really was. I was wrong. As soon as I started talking, I could feel the tension rise in the air. I told them about my idea, how I was working to make it a reality. My voice shook slightly, but I kept going. I wanted them to hear me. I wanted them to understand. But instead, I was met with laughter. Ethan, leaning back in his chair, his smug grin plastered across his face, sneered at me. "Get real," he said. "You're not a man to run a business." His words sliced through the air, sharp and cold. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe it. This was my family, and they were mocking me, mocking my dream, my everything. I turned to Dad, hoping for something, anything, some kind of acknowledgement that maybe I wasn't crazy for trying. Maybe he'd see it, see me. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with that cold, calculating expression he always wore and said, "You're a failure at this, Mia. Stick to something simple, like a secretary." It felt like the world stopped. My stomach dropped. The words were like a slap. Not only did he dismiss my idea, he reduced me to nothing. A secretary, my dream, my hard work, everything I'd poured into this was nothing to him. I looked down at the table, willing the tears to stay behind my eyes, but they didn't. They were already there, threatening to spill over. I couldn't let them see me break. Not again. I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape of it on the wooden floor louder than it should have been in the heavy silence. My hand gripped the back of the chair for a moment, trying to steady myself. I knew then what I had to do. I couldn't stay here. Not in this house. Not with them. I grabbed my coat, barely hearing my mom's soft voice calling after me. "Mia, wait!" But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The silence from her, the absence of any support, was louder than anything she could have said. I walked out, and I didn't go back. That night, I cut ties. I didn't call. I didn't visit. I didn't even reply to the birthday cards Mom sent me every year. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't face it. I couldn't face them. Every time I thought about picking up the phone, about trying to make things right, I would hear Dad's voice in my head. "You're a failure at this, Mia." Nothing had changed. Nothing ever would. They saw me as the girl who wasn't good enough. I wasn't their son. I wasn't important enough to matter, and so I left. 6 years passed, and during all that time, I carried those words with me. I built my company in silence. I worked, I fought, I kept my head down and pushed forward. But the scars they left, especially Dad's, never healed. They never went away. Now, standing at the gates of the ranch again, everything came rushing back. 6 years of fighting for something they would never understand. 6 years of trying to prove I wasn't a failure, that I could stand on my own, but I wasn't sure it had worked. Would they ever see me? Would they ever understand? Ethan's words still echoed in my head, like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. "Get real, you're not a man to run a business." But it wasn't just his words, it was Dad's too. "You're a failure at this, Mia." Could I ever forgive them for that? For making me feel like I wasn't enough? Could I ever go back to that place where they saw me as less than what I had become? The ranch loomed ahead, the light from the setting sun casting long, soft shadows across the fields. I remembered it as a place I once called home, but now it felt foreign to me, almost like a distant dream, a place where I tried so hard to belong, only to be told time and time again that I wasn't worth it. I sighed heavily, the weight of those 6 years pressing down on me. I had fought so hard to get here, to be something they could never understand. But now, standing here, in the silence of the night, I couldn't help but wonder, will I ever truly belong to this family? I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, the cool air biting at my skin. Every step toward that door felt heavier than the last. I wasn't sure I was ready for what was waiting inside, but I couldn't turn back now. I had to face it. And maybe, just maybe, this time I'd find the strength to stop pretending I didn't care. The rented car hummed steadily beneath me as I drove through the endless Texas fields. the golden glow of the setting sun painting everything in a soft, warm hue. The sun, dipping lower on the horizon, seemed like it was on fire, casting long shadows on the dirt road ahead. The wind outside whistled faintly through the cracks in the window, but inside, the air was thick with tension. I wasn't sure if it was the weight of the past or the fear of what was waiting for me at the ranch, but every mile I drove felt like it stretched on forever. I had hoped that returning here would bring closure, a chance to reconnect, to face the demons of my past head on and maybe, just maybe, find a way to belong again. But as the ranch came closer into view, my heart began to race. Was I really ready to face the people who had turned their backs on me all those years ago? I glanced down at my outfit, hoodie, jeans. Nothing about me screamed billionaire, not that I cared. I had worked for everything I had, and I didn't want anyone to think I was coming back just to flaunt my success. The money meant nothing if it didn't come with respect. I wasn't here for them to see how much I had made. I was here to show them who I had become. But the unease still lingered. It gnawed at me. What if they never saw me as anything more than that girl they had rejected? The radio crackled softly as I passed fields and old barns, the occasional gust of wind rattling the car. But then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard it. Dad's voice, clear and cold, on the other end of the phone. I wasn't trying to listen in, but the phone call was too loud to ignore. "It's time," Dad's voice said, low but sharp. "The new will must be finalized before Thanksgiving." My grip on the steering wheel tightened. The new will? My stomach dropped. What new will? My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just overheard. Why was he talking about this now, of all times? The words "new" will echoed in my ears, setting off a flare of suspicion that I couldn't shake. I had always known Dad was manipulative, but this felt different. He had always controlled everything, from the family business to our futures, but I had hoped, foolishly, that he had changed. That time and distance would soften him. But now, hearing that phone call, I wondered if he had been planning something all along. Something to cut me out, to keep me from what was rightfully mine. I wasn't sure what to do with the information. I tried to push the thought aside, but it clung to me like a shadow. What was he planning? What did it all mean? I tried to focus on the road ahead, on the approaching ranch, but the questions kept swirling in my mind. My startup had just sold for $2.8 billion. I had worked so hard for that success, and it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself that I could do it, that I was more than the girl who'd been pushed aside. But now, hearing about a new will, I feared that all my efforts would be dismissed. Would Dad use the money to keep me at arm's length? To manipulate the situation further? My heart was pounding in my chest now, each beat more frantic than the last. Should I confront him? Should I walk in there and demand answers? But what if I was wrong? What if it was nothing? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of anxiety. I couldn't let myself be dragged back into that place. I had come this far, fought this hard. I wasn't about to let him pull me back into his world of manipulation. But the deeper question was, did I have the strength to face him again? To confront the man who had told me I was a failure and kept me at arm's length my entire life? The thought made my chest tighten. The fear that had once defined my every move was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. But I had changed. I had built something from nothing, something real, something that was mine, and that made me stronger. It had to. I glanced at the rearview mirror, catching the faint glow of the house lights in the distance. The ranch was so close now, my childhood home, the place where it all began, the place where I had once tried so hard to be seen, to be heard. But it was also the place where I had been cast aside, dismissed for not fitting their mold. And yet, here I was, driving toward it again. I didn't know what to expect when I walked through those doors. Would they see me, as the woman I had become, or would I always be the girl they rejected? The road stretched on in front of me, and with each passing second, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The fear, the uncertainty, the memories that seemed to resurface with every mile. But this time, I wasn't running away. I was walking into the lion's den, ready to face whatever came next. I just had to remind myself, I'm not that girl anymore. And as I pulled into the driveway, the lights of the house flickering in the distance, I took a deep breath. I had come this far. I wasn't turning back now. The warm glow of Thanksgiving lights welcomed me as I stepped into the ranch. A golden hue bathed the entire living room, flickering softly against the walls like a memory I could never quite escape. The familiar scent of roasting turkey and mashed potatoes hung thick in the air, almost comforting, but nothing about this moment felt warm. Not really. Not with everything that had come before. Mom was the first to see me. Her arms opened wide before I even had a chance to step inside fully, wrapping me in a hug so tight that it almost felt suffocating. I could feel the moisture in her eyes before I even saw them. She had always been the one to hold things together, even when I was pushed aside, even when Dad's cold indifference made me question my place here. She held me for a moment longer, as if trying to convey everything that had been left unsaid. I stood there stiff, unsure of what to feel. My heart swelled with a mixture of love and sorrow, but the deeper ache of the past never really left. I tried to return the hug, but it felt like I was holding on to something that wasn't truly mine anymore. Then I heard Dad. From his armchair by the window, his gaze never left the book in his hands, his posture stiff as usual. He didn't stand up, didn't offer a word of greeting, just a stiff nod in my direction, as though acknowledging me was a mere formality. I didn't expect anything more, but the coldness of that simple gesture hit harder than I wanted to admit. "Welcome home, Mia," Mom whispered, pulling away, her voice tinged with a sadness I couldn't place. As I glanced around the room, the familiar faces of my brothers were unmistakable. Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, his arms stretched across the back, casually leaning against his wife, Sarah. Their daughter, Lily, who couldn't be older than 8, was bouncing in her seat, eager to show off some little craft she had made. Dylan, my younger brother, sat across from them with his wife, Emma. Dylan's son, Alex, a teenager now, was lounging nearby, his eyes glued to a game on his phone. The whole family was here, as usual, except for one thing. There was no warmth, no welcome, just the usual boasting. Ethan, of course, was the first to break the silence. His voice, loud and eager, filled the room with that all-too-familiar arrogance. "Our agribusiness spans 3 states now, Mia. What are you up to in New York?" It wasn't a question meant to engage. It was a challenge, a reminder that I had no place here. He didn't care about what I'd done, not really. His smirk told me that much. The words stung, but I forced them down, swallowing the rush of frustration and anger that surged up inside me. This wasn't the time. I wasn't here to get into a fight. Not yet. I wasn't sure if I even had the strength for it, but I couldn't help but notice how easy it was for them to talk about the agribusiness expansion, how effortless their lives seemed, how the empire Dad had built from the ground up was their legacy, a legacy I would never be part of, a legacy I had never been allowed into. I tried to shake it off. I wasn't that girl anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had my own success now, my own life to live. As I shifted my gaze around the room, my eyes caught something on Dad's oak desk. A letter, half hidden among papers. The word "confidential" was printed across the envelope in bold black letters, and something about it caught my attention. The letter was addressed to Dad, and I couldn't help but wonder, what was so important that it had to be marked confidential? I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept drifting back to the letter. I didn't know why it unsettled me so much, but it did. And in that moment, I could feel the familiar unease creeping back. Dad was always so secretive, always working behind the scenes. What if this letter had something to do with the will? Was he planning something again? Something to keep me out? The tension in the room was thick, but I swallowed it down, pushing the thoughts aside for now. There was no point in digging into it just yet, not when the last thing I wanted was to stir things up again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The smell of the Thanksgiving dinner wafted in from the kitchen, a reminder that we were supposed to be celebrating, that we were supposed to be a family. But with every passing second, it felt less and less like a homecoming and more like a reminder of how far apart we had all drifted. I could hear Mom calling everyone to the table. The smell of turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing was almost suffocating now, mixing with the anxiety and uncertainty swirling inside me. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the weight of everything that was left unsaid. As I followed Mom into the dining room, I glanced back once more at Dad's desk. The letter was still there, still waiting. I couldn't ignore it forever. But for now, I had to pretend like everything was fine. I took a seat at the table, trying to steady my breath, but my thoughts kept racing. What did that letter mean? Why was Dad hiding something? What was he planning? I had no answers, and as I sat there, surrounded by the family that had once rejected me, the anxiety only deepened. The warm, comforting aroma of turkey and cornbread hung heavily in the air as I sat at the table. My fingers gripping the edge of my plate so tightly my knuckles were white. The yellow lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the food, mounds of mashed potatoes, glistening turkey, and golden cornbread. Everything about the scene screamed warmth, home, family. But the longer I sat there, the more it felt like a scene from a nightmare. The conversation around me was filled with boasts and casual laughter, but every word felt like a dagger. Ethan was the first to start, of course. He had always been the one to take center stage. Our agribusiness just saw a 40% revenue increase this year, he announced, his voice booming as though he were giving a speech. Dad's guidance really helped us push things to the next level. His words were like a constant reminder of everything I could never have. The success, the recognition, the position I was always told I didn't belong in. It was all laid out before me, Ethan and Dylan basking in the glow of their father's approval. I could practically see the pride in Dad's eyes as they spoke, that same glint he never directed toward me. Dylan chimed in next, his voice just as smug. Yeah, it's been great. We're expanding to 3 states now. Can't wait to see where we'll go next. I could feel my chest tightening with every word they said. Their success, their constant need to remind me of it, felt like they were rubbing salt into an open wound. The more they boasted, the more I felt like an outsider, an uninvited guest at my own family's table. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile of anger back down my throat. I tried to focus on my plate, but the pressure in the air was suffocating. I could feel Dad's cold gaze on me, and I knew it wasn't out of pride. It was the same judgment I'd felt my entire life. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. So, Mia, how's your little job in New York? I froze. My heart stopped for a second as I looked up at him. His eyes, cold, piercing, locked onto mine with that same dismissive look. He didn't care about what I had achieved. He didn't care that my startup had just sold for $2.8 billion. To him, it was nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a hobby. His tone, condescending, made my blood boil. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I kept it in check, swallowing it down like I had done so many times before. It's good, Dad, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like they were choking me, but I had to bite my tongue. Just busy. A lot of work to do. Ethan and Dylan exchanged a glance, snickering under their breath. I could feel their eyes on me, mocking, judging. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the room was palpable, and all I wanted was to stand up and leave. But I couldn't. Not yet. Dad's gaze didn't waver. It felt like I was back in that courtroom, the one where I was always on trial, always being judged for not measuring up to their expectations, for not being enough. This table feels like a courtroom, I thought, my mind racing with frustration. I'm on trial again, and I'll never win. The anger twisted in my chest as I looked around the table at the faces I once called my family. Ethan, Dylan, Sarah, Emma, none of them saw me as I really was. None of them saw the woman I had become. They only saw the girl they could manipulate, the one they could push aside and ignore, the one who had no place in their world. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my plate across the room and say everything I'd been holding back for years. But I didn't. I stayed silent, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard I could feel the wood digging into my palms. The tension thickened as the dinner continued, the conversation circling around their business, their plans, their dreams. And me, I was just the outsider, the girl who didn't belong. Every word they said felt like a reminder that I was never part of their world, no matter how hard I tried to be. The weight of it all crashed down on me, and I realized, no matter what I achieved, no matter how much I proved myself, it would never be enough. To them, I would always be the disappointment, but I wasn't the little girl anymore. I wasn't the one they could dismiss without consequences. And as the dinner carried on, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them continue to control me. Not anymore. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I sat there, choking down the rage and frustration that threatened to spill over. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just sitting at this table anymore. I was getting ready to stand up. I was getting ready to take control of the narrative. And when I did, they would finally see me. Not as the daughter they discarded, but as the woman who had fought to build her own place in the world. The room was dead silent. I could feel the weight of every gaze on me as Dad stood, the sharp clink of his glass making the air feel thick, suffocating. He tapped it again, slow and deliberate, making sure everyone's attention was fixed on him. The tension was palpable, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. His voice broke through the stillness, cold and controlled. "I've decided," he began, his eyes scanning the room with that familiar, calculating look. "Ethan will be the new CEO of the company. Dylan will be VP. And Mia—" I already knew where this was going. My heart sank, but I steeled myself. I had heard it before. The disappointment, the dismissal, the disregard for everything I'd worked for. "Mia," he continued, his voice a blade, "you've always been my disappointment. You've chosen your own path, and because of that, you're not worth a dime of this." The words hit me harder than I expected. My stomach twisted into knots, but I didn't flinch. He tossed the will onto the table, the paper landing with a resounding thud, like a final judgment. I wanted to scream, to throw everything in his face, but I stayed still, my hands clenched beneath the table. I swallowed the anger, forcing it back down. I would not let him break me, not here, not now. I glanced across the table at Ethan, his smug smile widening as he watched me. He had always been the favored one, the golden child, the heir. Now it was official. He had everything he ever wanted, everything that should have been mine. The jealousy rolling off of him was almost tangible. It was suffocating. I wanted to stand up, slam my hand on the table, and demand the respect I deserved. I wanted to throw everything I had built in their faces. I wanted to tell them that I was the one who had achieved something, but I didn't. I stayed calm, but barely holding it together. The silence lingered. The weight of Dad's words hung in the air, making it harder to breathe with every passing second. My thoughts raced, but I kept them locked behind a carefully constructed wall. My breath came in shallow gasps, but I forced myself to stay composed. Then, suddenly, a voice broke through the thick tension, sharp and bright. "Aunt Mia's on CNBC's Billionaire list." Alex's voice was filled with excitement, cutting through the room like a knife. He was holding up his phone, and the screen was glowing in the dim light of the dining room. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart stopped as I looked at him, then at the screen. The words "Billionaire list" seemed to echo in the room, louder than anything else. Alex pointed to the headline on the phone, and I saw it in bold letters. Mia Thompson, startup founder, joins Billionaire ranks after $2.8 billion deal. The words blurred as my pulse raced, my thoughts reeling. Billionaire? Me? The room exploded into chaos. Ethan's face drained of color. His arrogant smirk disappeared, replaced by something darker. Something I couldn't quite place. Jealousy? Fear? Maybe both. His eyes locked onto me, the shift in his expression unmistakable. He wasn't in control anymore. The power dynamic had shifted, and suddenly I was the one with the upper hand. Dad's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to speak but unable to find the words. I watched him, a cold satisfaction settling deep inside me. This was the moment, the one I had worked for in silence, the one they had never expected, and now they were seeing it. They were seeing me, but I didn't react. I didn't let them see the satisfaction on my face. I stayed calm. I sipped my coffee, the heat of it doing nothing to cool the fire burning inside me. "Yes, it's true," I said, my voice steady, calm. "It's been a long road, but I made it." The room fell into stunned silence. No one knew what to say. The disbelief in their eyes was almost palpable, as if they couldn't process what had just happened. The tension in the room shifted from judgment to confusion, to something else entirely. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on solid ground. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in Dad's eyes. Regret? Maybe. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by that same cold, calculating look he had worn all my life. Ethan, trying desperately to regain control of the situation, cleared his throat. His voice was shaky when he spoke. You're serious?" The disbelief was thick in his voice, and I could see the jealousy in his eyes. "You actually did it?" I met his gaze, my eyes unwavering. I did. I built something, without anyone's help. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on all of them. The smug confidence they had once had was gone, replaced by something darker, something I couldn't help but enjoy. The silence stretched on, each second heavier than the last. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would they finally see me for who I was? Or would they always view me as the girl who didn't fit into their world, the girl who never measured up to their expectations? I didn't know the answer, but I was ready to find out. As I sat there, calm and collected, I couldn't help but wonder, will they see me differently now? Or would I always be the disappointment in their eyes? Would they ever accept me for who I had become? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. The room erupted into chaos the moment Alex's words hit the air. I could feel the tension crackle in the dining room like static electricity before a storm. Mom's eyes were wide, mouth slightly open, as though she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Ethan, on the other hand, was already on his feet, his voice rising in a bitter, accusatory tone. "You hid this to mess with us, didn't you?" he spat at me. His jealousy was so thick, I could taste it in the air. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at him, trying to suppress the rush of anger that surged in my chest. I could feel the familiar heat in my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for a fight, but as the words sunk in, I could feel the weight of it all. How his words were just another attempt to bring me down, to strip me of my victory, to twist it into something dark and ugly. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tell him that this wasn't a game, that I hadn't hidden anything. I had built something from nothing. But I stayed silent, watching him, knowing that anything I said would only give him more ammunition. Instead, I glanced down at the table, my eyes falling to the letter Dad had carelessly tossed there. The Will Update Confidential label jumped out at me, glaring in its simplicity. The sight of it sent a chill through my body. I'd already suspected something wasn't right. But now, seeing that letter there in the open, the doubt gnawed at me like an animal clawing at my insides. What was Dad planning? Was this more than just an inheritance decision? Was there a larger scheme at play? Something to hide the family assets? I had no answers, but the suspicion grew deeper by the second. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could hear the shouts and arguments escalating around me, but everything felt muffled. The words from Ethan, from Mom, from Dylan, all of it seemed to fade into the background. I was too focused on the letter, on the revelation that Dad had been making moves behind the scenes, hiding things from all of us. I didn't know the full picture, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't good. I glanced at the letter again, the question burning in my mind. Was this why Dad had cut me out of the will? Was he trying to move everything offshore to avoid paying taxes, or worse, to protect his wealth from me? The thought made me feel sick. He was always so controlling, so manipulative. But now it was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about power. This was about keeping everything for himself and maintaining control over the family, over everything. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What else was he hiding? What else had he planned? The table was a mess now. Plates scattered, glasses half filled, the remnants of dinner forgotten in the chaos. Ethan's voice kept rising, his accusations hitting me like arrows. Dylan, sitting quietly, seemed to be avoiding the storm. Mom's silence was unbearable. She hadn't said a word, her eyes flickering between me and Dad. She had never stood up for me before. Why would she now? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it was getting harder to ignore the rising tide of emotions threatening to break free. I had come so far. I had built something real. But here they were again, treating me like an outsider, a failure. "Why do you think I'd hide something like this, Ethan?" I finally said, my voice surprisingly steady. I looked him in the eye. "You think I came back here to mess with you all? You think I care about your pathetic little empire?" His eyes flashed with anger, but I could see the crack in his confidence. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. I couldn't help the small, bitter smile that tugged at my lips as I watched him falter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the victim. I didn't feel like the disappointment. I had a seat at this table now. I had earned it. And despite everything, I wasn't going to let them tear me down again. I could feel my breath slowing, the sharp edge of the moment hanging over us. But still, something didn't sit right. The letter on the table, the suspicion about Dad's manipulation. It was all too much. I needed answers. As the arguments raged around me, I pushed away from the table, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. The weight of everything, the anger, the confusion, the betrayal, was starting to overwhelm me. "What's going on, Dad?" I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible, though the words felt like they were being torn from my chest. "What is this all about? Why hide things from us? Why hide everything?" Dad's face remained emotionless. The cold, distant look I had come to expect from him was there again, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, his voice barely audible. But I did understand. I had spent years watching him. I knew exactly what he was doing, and now I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The room was spinning around me, but I forced myself to stay focused. There was something bigger at play here, something Dad was trying to keep hidden, and I was going to find out what it was. As I looked around the room, I saw the same faces, the same people who had rejected me, who had tried to control me. But now, for the first time, I felt different. I wasn't their pawn anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. I was ready to fight. The office smelled like old wood and stale coffee, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. I sat in the same chair I'd sat in countless times as a child, except now it felt different, heavier, suffocating. Dad was standing by the window, looking out at the ranch with that same distant expression he'd worn for as long as I could remember. He hadn't said a word since the dinner, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. "Mia," he finally said, his voice low but firm. "You have to understand. I didn't want to see you fail. That's why I didn't help you. I wanted you to be independent, to prove yourself on your own." His words stung. I hadn't expected a confession, not from him. I had always known that Dad saw me as a disappointment, as someone who would never live up to his expectations. But to hear him say it like this, to hear him justify everything he had done, twisted something deep inside me. "You wanted me to fail," I replied, my voice shaking with the anger I was struggling to hold back. "You didn't want me to succeed. You didn't even believe in me." He turned to face me, his eyes cold and calculating. "No, I protected you from failure," he said, his tone clipped, as if the words had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "I didn't want you to be disappointed when everything fell apart. It was easier this way." Easier. I felt my chest tighten at the word. Easier for him, maybe, but not for me. He had taken everything from me, the support, the belief, the love I had so desperately craved. And now, here he was, trying to justify it all. The anger I had buried deep inside me for so long surged to the surface, threatening to spill over. But before I could say anything, I heard a soft knock at the door. Mom. She entered the room quietly, her eyes filled with hesitation. She seemed so small standing there, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot the anger that had been building inside me. She had always been my rock, the one person I thought would never let me down. "Mia, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost apologetic. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. She motioned for me to follow her to the kitchen, and I did, the familiar scent of cornbread and coffee filling my nose as we walked down the hall. The dim light from the overhead lamp cast soft shadows across the countertops, but everything felt off, out of place, like I was walking through a memory that no longer belonged to me. Once we reached the kitchen, she pulled out a chair and sat down, motioning for me to do the same. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something, Mia," she said, her voice trembling. She looked away from me, her hands twisting in her lap. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. "What is it, Mom?" She took a deep breath, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. "I tried to send you money for tuition. Your father." He stopped me. He said it was better for you to learn on your own, that you had to figure things out yourself. He didn't want you to have anything from us. The words hit me like a slap to the face. My stomach churned, and for a moment I couldn't process what she had just said. "What do you mean you tried to send me money?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out to take my hand. "I was afraid of what your father would do if I went against him. He was so sure you needed to fail, Mia. I thought I was helping by not causing trouble, by staying quiet. But I should have told you sooner. I'm so sorry." The pain in her voice made my heart ache, but it also made something inside me snap. How could she have kept this from me? How could she have let Dad manipulate both of us for so long? She had been the one person I trusted, the one person I thought would always stand by me, and yet she had been complicit in his cruelty, in his control over me. "I thought you were on my side," I whispered, the words tasting bitter as I spoke them. "I thought you were the one who believed in me." She squeezed my hand tighter, as if trying to make up for the years of silence. "I do believe in you, Mia. I always have. But I was afraid of losing him. I was afraid of making things worse. I didn't want you to see him like this. But I can't keep hiding it from you anymore." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I felt betrayed, not just by Dad, but by her too. She had been the one person I thought would protect me from his manipulation, from the damage he caused. And yet, she had been silent all these years. I pulled my hand away from hers, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. "How could you hide this from me, Mom? How could you let him do this to me?" She started to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping her. "No, I need to process this on my own. I can't just forgive you for this. Not yet." The pain in her eyes was almost too much to bear, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just brush it off and pretend like everything was fine. Not this time. Not after everything that had happened. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, and I stood up, my heart heavy with a mixture of anger and confusion. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Mom, but I need time. I need to figure out what to do with all this." I walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving her sitting there, her face filled with regret and sorrow. But I couldn't stay. Not now. Not with everything that had just come to light. As I stepped out into the cool air, the weight of everything, Dad's manipulation, Mom's betrayal, settled on me like a storm, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to face either of them the same way again. The buzz of my phone was sharp, a jarring sound in the otherwise thick silence that had settled after the dinner disaster. I reached for it instinctively, pulling it from my pocket, expecting something work-related. It was the last thing I needed right now, but at the same time, it was the distraction I craved. A colleague's name flashed on the screen. "Mia!" The voice crackled through the line. Frantic. "We've hit a problem with the post-sale integration. We need your help immediately." My mind was racing. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to step away from the mess that had just unfolded at dinner, from the burning betrayal still settling in my chest. But I didn't have a choice. Work was calling. It was always calling, demanding more of me than anyone else ever had. "All right, I'm on my way," I said, my voice tight but controlled. I didn't have time to process everything. There wasn't space to think about Dad's cruelty, Ethan's manipulation, or the gnawing suspicion that had settled in my gut. I glanced back at the dining room, hearing the faint murmur of voices from inside, and then I turned toward the door. The dim light above me flickered slightly, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. It felt as if I was walking away from the wreckage of my past, not knowing whether I'd be able to rebuild it. But before I could make it out, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Alex was standing there, his eyes wide with something that I couldn't quite place. "Aunt Mia, you need to see this," he said, holding his phone out to me. His face was serious, the kind of expression I had never seen on him before. "It's about Uncle Ethan." I stepped closer, the air thick with unease, and looked at the screen of his phone. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Uncle Ethan texted your company last month," Alex said, his voice clipped, full of urgency. "He's been trying to manipulate the sale of your startup, trying to make it look like it was his idea. He's hiding it from the family." I blinked, the weight of his words crashing down on me. Ethan. My brother. The person I had always trusted, the person who had always seemed to be one step ahead of me, had been working behind my back this entire time, trying to take what I had built. He didn't just envy me. He had been trying to steal my work, to erase me and make it his own. The betrayal was overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on my chest, cutting off my breath. The screen of Alex's phone blurred before my eyes. I stared at the text messages, the cold reality of Ethan's selfish schemes sinking in. He wasn't just jealous of my success. He wasn't just trying to undermine me in subtle ways. He had crossed a line, trying to exploit my success for his own gain, hiding it from everyone, even the family. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. The anger was bubbling up inside me, hot and raw. But at the same time, there was a coldness, an emptiness that wrapped around my heart. How could he do this? How could he betray me like this after everything? Alex's voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. "I'm sorry, Aunt Mia," he said softly, his voice full of regret. "I didn't know if you knew, but I had to tell you." I looked at him, still reeling. "Thank you," I managed to say, the words barely leaving my lips. I wasn't sure if I was thanking him for the information or for being the one to show me the truth, but it didn't feel like enough. Nothing felt like enough. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let Ethan's betrayal slide like all the other times. This time, it was different. This time, it was the final straw. I turned toward the door, my steps slow, deliberate. Each movement felt heavier than the last, like I was carrying the weight of everything, of all the lies, the betrayal, the hurt, and I didn't know if I could ever put it down. As I reached for the door handle, I turned back one last time to look at the house, the place that had been home for so long, the place where I had hoped for love and support, only to find manipulation and deceit. I stepped out into the cool night air, the door clicking softly behind me. The moment I stepped away from the house, I felt the tension in my chest ease just a little. The car was waiting for me, the engine humming softly, but the noise didn't feel like a relief. It was just more noise, more distractions from the chaos inside my mind. The world outside felt so distant now. The ranch, the family, everything that had been so familiar, so comforting, now felt like a stranger. I climbed into the car and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, cutting through the darkness, but it did nothing to cut through the confusion swirling inside me. I knew I had to keep moving. I had to keep driving forward, away from this place, away from the family that had broken me. But even as I drove away, there was a lingering unease. The weight of Ethan's betrayal pressed down on me, and I couldn't shake it. Would he ever change? Would he ever see what he had done? Or would I forever be left to wonder if I was nothing more than a stepping stone for his selfish gain? I didn't know, but I had to keep moving forward because the past was nothing but a trail of broken promises and empty words, and I couldn't go back. A year had passed since that night, the night my world had been flipped upside down. Now, as I drove through the Texas fields again, the sun breaking over the horizon, casting a golden glow over everything, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. My car hummed steadily beneath me, the familiar smell of the dusty road mixing with the fresh scent of morning air. I wasn't just coming back to the ranch. I was coming back to something new, something better. Last year, I had left here feeling broken, betrayed, and unsure of where I fit in. But now, everything had changed. I had changed. I was no longer the girl they tried to bury in their expectations. I was Mia Thompson, the woman who had built a billion-dollar company, who had overcome every obstacle they'd thrown at me. I had nothing to prove to them. But now, I could see that maybe, just maybe, they had something to prove to me. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. The ranch looked different this time, somehow softer, like it had aged with grace, just like me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and walked toward the door. Mom was the first to greet me. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled me into a tight hug, her arms wrapping around me like they had when I was little. Her hug was full of apologies I didn't need to hear out loud. It was in the way she held me, the way her body trembled just slightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mia," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't say anything in response. I didn't need to. We both knew what those words meant. Inside, Dad was sitting by the fire, his face soft, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. He looked up as I entered, but his usual coldness wasn't there. He seemed different, like he had finally shed the armor he'd worn for so many years. There were signs of change in him. He was going to therapy, trying to rebuild the relationship he had destroyed, and for the first time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, he was trying to be better. "Your mother told me about the fund," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's for people like you, Mia, people who break the mold, who take risks." I nodded slowly, my emotions mixed. I could feel the years of resentment still lingering, but there was something else now, too. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe, like me, he had finally realized that success wasn't about inheritance or the control he had tried to wield for so long. It was about legacy, about giving back, about changing the world for the better, and starting a fund for women entrepreneurs. That was a legacy I could respect. Dylan, too, had changed. He was no longer just the quiet bystander. He was now actively working with me, integrating technology into the family business, seeing the value in innovation and forward thinking. He asked me if I would consider mentoring Alex, his son, and I couldn't help but smile. "Of course," I said, thinking about how different Alex was from his father. He had a spark, a curiosity, a drive I hadn't seen in the family before. It felt like the beginning of something fresh, something hopeful. Lily, who had once been so quiet, now sat at a table in the corner, her laptop glowing brightly as she worked on coding a new project. She had changed too. The girl who had watched from the sidelines was now building her future, carving her own path. And I saw myself in her. For the first time in years, I felt hope for the next generation, the younger ones, the ones who had the courage to break free from the old ways, to carve out their own futures without the weight of our past holding them back. And as we sat down at the expanded dining table, the warm light of the setting sun spilling through the windows, I realized how much had shifted. Last year, this place had been a battlefield, full of tension, resentment, and the scars of years of hurt. But now it felt different. We were all here, together, at the table, talking, laughing, and for the first time, truly listening to each other. The air smelled like cornbread and home, and even though there was still work to be done, I knew we were on the right track. The warmth of the sunlight matched the warmth that was slowly growing between us. The past year had been a journey of healing, of facing our flaws, our fears, and our failures. But now, there was a chance for something better. A chance to leave behind the old wounds and start fresh. And as I looked around the table, I realized that this was my true legacy. Not the money, not the billion-dollar company. It was the impact I could have on the world, on the people who mattered most. It was about what I passed down, values, wisdom, and the belief that worth comes from within, not from anyone else's validation. I took a deep breath, feeling both relief and unease at the same time. I had built something I was proud of, but I had also learned that reconciliation required honesty and forgiveness. Sometimes to heal, we had to face the truth and face it together. Families can change, I thought to myself, but you define your worth. And with that thought, I felt ready to move forward, to keep working, to keep giving back, to keep building. Not just for me, but for the ones who would come after me. If you've ever been doubted by family or found a way to reconcile, share your story in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and share if this story inspired you.